So welcome everyone. This is Excel in its version 2016. What we're going to be covering is functions and formulas. This is one of the more popular sessions of Excel. It does cover the big basics or the beginnings of what the difference is between a formula and then a function. And then we go and we grow the knowledge by showing you different types of functions and ending with data ranges or defining data ranges using data names. Creating functions with using those data ranges, and then going into some of the more popular functions such as an if, a payment, a dsum, which is a database sum, and then a vertical lookup. Those seems to be the most of the functions that I get a lot of questions on. If you have anything that you would like to cover that I don't cover during the class, there's going to be a question and answer afterwards, and we can always cover it at that point. So to begin with, I am going to be showing you the difference between a formula and a function. A formula uses the column names and the row names. Those would be cell references. So for example, I'm going to use this existing data here. If I needed to know what May income plus June's income is, I can do it a couple different ways. I can just type using the numbers, or I can use the cell references. And that's where the big difference is going to become between a formula and a function. Formula uses cell references, and a function will use ranges. So I'm going to show an example. By starting either a function or a formula, you have to hit the equal sign. And then I'm going to type in 15,500, and I'm going to hit the operator, which is the plus for the addition, and then the 17,050. And once I hit enter, I'm going to get my result. Now the contents of I3 is not what you see. So what you see in Excel may not actually be what's in the cell. 32,550 is the result of the true contents of I3. If I click on I3, up in the formula bar, you're going to see the actual formula, which is the 15,500 plus the 17,050. That is the actual content. If I were to type right now, I will overwrite that formula, which is a lot of the problems that people will experience once they've created a spreadsheet or someone else has created it for them, and perhaps they don't understand that when there is a number being displayed, that may not be what's actually in the cell. So it's always safest to click on the cell first, take a look at what's in the formula bar before you actually start typing. And then that way, if you are overriding a formula, you are breaking your spreadsheet. As we update numbers, the calculation will not happen and you will end up with wrong answers. So for example, if May is not really 15,500 and it's really 16,000, I'm going to update that. Watch what happens with the I3. Notice that I3 still remained at 32,550. And the reason is, if I take a look at my formula, what is my reference here? My reference is a stagnant number. It's not referring to a cell. So to actually create formulas, we very few times do we ever use an actual number. It will always be a cell reference. You can add an actual number to the end of the formula, perhaps multiply it by 10 or divide it by 5. Those things are okay because it's a stagnant number that needs to be divided by. But for actual calculating of a specific number, you should always use the cell reference. So I'm going to recreate this. I can either just type inside that cell or I can highlight this in my formula bar, hit my equal sign, and now I'm going to actually click on the cells. So I'm going to come down to F3, I'm going to hit the plus sign, and I'm going to go to G3. After I have all of my cell references selected, I just hit enter, and you can see that it updated the number. Now if I go back to my actual cell reference or my income for May and change it back to 15,500, I think it was, 15,500. and it will then automatically update my answer. Now, the display is still 32,550, but the contents is now that formula. So a true formula is using cell references. So the other thing that we need to understand about formulas is sometimes they don't give you the correct answer when you type them in. And the reason is because Excel uses that algebraic thinking of the mathematical order of operations. So if you don't know that, we're going to actually go back to 6th grade and we're going to learn that. I'm going to type in the best example to use is to bowl. When someone goes bowling, they usually bowl 3 games. You determine an average off of those 3 games. So I'm going to type in 3 games. I'm going to actually format this as general so it all looks right. So those are my 3 games of bowling. I need to determine what my average is. So I need to do this in English first. If you can say it in English, you can create a formula for it. So the first thing that I want to do is add those 3 up. So I get my equal sign, and I'm going to say 120 plus 100 plus 140 gives me my total average, which is the 360. My total games. Now to determine an average, I know that I have to take that total and divide it by the number of games, which is 3. So I'm going to go ahead and type 360, and I'm going to divide it by the number of games. I'm going to go ahead and mute there. That way you don't have to worry about talking. So that is my formula right there, 360 divided by 3, and it's going to now give me my average, which is 120, which is what it should be. If I were to use cell references, which I can go here, equal, which I should, the cell reference, and then hit enter. And then on my average, choose that cell reference and divide by the number of games. And I get the same information. Both of these are the same, whether I type it in or whether I use cell reference. If I change my games, only this one using the cell references will update. Now, if I were to type this out, again, plain English, I'm going to say it in plain English. Now I'm going to type it out. I'm going to do equal I3 plus I4 plus I5, which is going to give me my sum, my total of 360. And my next step is to divide it by the number of games. So the division sign is the /. That's the one that goes over to the right. And the number of games is 3. So if I can say it, I can type it, I should have 120. If you notice, I don't have 120. And the reason I don't have 120 is the order in which the way Excel calculates. The please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So it's please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division. And my keyboard didn't like that one. We'll do this one. It's funny. Addition and subtraction. I don't know quite why it doesn't want me to type it, but we'll force it. So these are the mathematical operators that are only available in formulas. You can use them in functions, but only if it's a nested formula within a function. A function uses a calculating word, equal sum, equal average, equal payment. And that function word is what is going to perform the calculation. In a formula, you have to have an operator in order to perform the calculation. So knowing the order in which Excel actually runs through the formula makes a difference. So this is the order. Anything in parentheses will be done first, then exponents, then multiplication or division, whichever comes first, leading left to right, and then addition and subtraction, whichever comes first, left to right. Knowing the order in which calculation will take place, let's read our formula. The addition in addition is going to be done when? After our division. So in reality, what is happening is Excel is taking I5, which is 140, and dividing it by 3. Then it's adding 120 and 100. So if we did this, the equal 140 and divide by 3 is really 46, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 7. Here's 100, and here's 120. If we were to add these together, and I'm just highlighting them, if you take a look at the bottom and do my addition, let's go ahead and just do it now with sum. You can see that it actually equals exactly the same. How do I correct this? Taking a look at the order of mathematical operations, what will always be done first? If I have this formula and I need to force Excel to add things first before it divides, because the order in which it will perform them, I need to add parentheses. So I'm going to come inside my formula, and I'm going to add a parenthesis in the beginning of my addition and at the end of my addition. And now that's going to force Excel to add 120, 100, and 140, which will give me my 360. Once it has that answer, it will move on to divide by the number 3, and it will give me my average of 120. So when you're dealing with formulas, as a recap, you use cell references rather than the actual text or value, because that will allow you to update as you change your numbers. The formula will actually function. You want to make sure that you use operators and that the operators are placed in the proper order. And it doesn't matter whether you put the division first or the addition last. It matters when it comes to what is it dividing and what is it adding or subtracting. It will always do the mathematical operators in the orders: parentheses, exponents, multiplication, and division, addition or subtraction. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and that's how I remember it. So that's your little spiel on formulas. The difference between a formula and a function is you can see that I used one right here. I actually used what's called the AutoSum, and this is a very quick way to do the most popular functions that are available, and you can set it to sum, which is addition, or average, counting, the max number return, or the minimum number return. There is also additional functions that you can set, and by default, whichever one that you put there, you click on it, it will perform with a click of a button. So that's why mine is set to sum. When I clicked on AutoSum, it automatically went up until it found no numbers. That's how it knew its range. So L3 and the colon between the two cell references, that means through. So it's L3 through L5. And that will then add it, because sum means the result of adding, and so it equals sum, that range. So that's a function. So now that we've introduced you to some functions, we're going to get into some more common ones. Instead of just addition, we're going to actually take a look at some averaging. When we want to enter in a function, there's a couple different ways that we can use it. I'm going to go ahead and delete this part if everyone's good with it. So now we're at B13. I'm in cell B13, and we're going to be adding in a function here. The ultimate result is I'm going to be averaging the net income. And if you read here, row 11, is the net income for 6 months worth of sales. So I need an average of that. There's a couple different ways that we can actually do this. You can do one by typing it in, just like I have shown you already, by hitting the equal sign. Now, average. I am just new to Excel. If I'm real new, perhaps I should use what's called the function or insert, the function library or the insert function feature, and that will allow me to look at functions in an alphabetical or in a logical way. And we're going to take a look at those next. But I know if I start typing average, or at least the letter A, it's going to give me this drop-down. And now I can very quickly look through all of the different functions that start with A. And then I can see, there's average. Now when you're dealing with average A, average if, and average if S, those are different than your regular average. So just be aware of that. You want to just do average. Don't do average A. So we select it, and it gives me a very quick brief. It returns the average arithmetic mean of its arguments, which can be numbers or names, arrays, or references. So you can do a lot of different things with it. That's the one that I want. I can double click it, and it will place it in the cell for me. Notice it says number 1, and then there's a comma, and number 2, comma, and a dot, dot, dot. Dot, dot, dot means to be continued. So you can continue adding numbers or cell references, if you will, ranges, that you would like to grab the contents or the displayed value, add them all together, divide them by the number that you have actually entered in, and it will display an average. The most common way that when you're dealing with this is going to be a range. So each one of those numbers is not actually a cell reference, it's going to be a range. We can type in the range. I'm going to be using B11 through G11. So if I'm going to type in B11 and I do the colon G11, because I really like to type, that's why I would do that. Notice when I enter it in, it's actually following me, Excel, by highlighting what my range is going to be. If that is the range that I want, normally you would close it with a parenthesis. Sometimes Excel will fill it in for you if it's a very simple basic function. So if I hit enter, it's just going to fill it in and it's going to display the result. The contents of B13 is not 1,770. It's actually the function of equal average with a range of B11 through G11. Now you notice when I typed it in there, it started to highlight. Well, I can also do the highlighting myself. This is the way I do it. I'll start by typing in my function, click and drag, and then just hit enter. So the click and drag to me seems to be a lot faster than if you type it in. The one that I had mentioned before was the insert function, or you can go to the formulas tab up in itself. If you are unsure of which function that you would like, this is a great place to spend your lunch hour reading over the thousands of functions that are available within Excel. Here's more functions if you don't have enough to read through here. And these more functions are the ones that are listed. And I have not gone through all of them, and some of them are way advanced for me. I really just use the ones that I need at the time that I need it, and then I've learned it, and it's like, cool, that's great, I'm going to use it again, or no, that's not really relevant to me, and I just choose not to retain it. The same thing can be done for you. You test them out, see if it's beneficial to you. If it is, great. If it's not, move on to a different one. There are lots of them. These lookup and references, addresses, choose columns. VLOOKUP is the sister to HLOOKUP. One is vertical, one is horizontal. And then if you highlight it, you can see that it gives you a little bit of a description of what it does and the syntax. So the word syntax, if you don't know, is actually how the function should be developed or designed. The word HLOOKUP will be the active word, so it's equal HLOOKUP. And then each one of these values is the lookup value, the table, which you would like it to look through, the index number, and then the range. Those 4 items are required. You hit a parenthesis at the end of it, and it will give you your result. Sounds simple, sometimes it's not. So this is the time and date. This works well if you're trying to do calculations with hours, minutes, seconds, or perhaps dates. So there's lots of stuff that can be used. Here's the recently used, and the or, sum, average, if, those are all real common ones. Here's your auto sum again, and here's also that insert function. So the insert function is on both the formula bar and in the formula tab. So we're going to do this exact same function again, but I'm going to show you a third way, which is the insert function. A lot of times this is probably the easiest because it explains it as you go along. I can actually type in here what I'm looking for. So I need average. And when I search go, it's going to look for it and it's going to highlight. So now I have my average. It gives me the syntax and it gives me a description. If I click OK, it's going to automatically assume that the numbers above it are what I want to average. Excel does this on its own, so pay attention of what ranges it's picking for you because they're not always right. And in this case, they're not because I do want B11, but I want it to go to the right, not up. So I need to change this. And I can use this little arrow to collapse this pop-up and allow me to click in the background. So now I'm going to click and drag. And that's a range name. And I should really probably delete that before we do this because I don't want to jump ahead of it. So we're just going to do a smaller one. And I'm going to select these 2, maybe 3. So you can now see I have a range. And now I click on this little down arrow, which will bring me my pop-up back. At this point, if I needed to select an additional range to average by, I would then go into number 2 and grab these. And so now I have 2 separate ranges that is going to add up and then divide by all of those cells. You can see that it's already giving me a result right here. So if there was an error, I would see an error message right there, and I know, okay, something's wrong. I need to read into it a little bit more. Here's the formula result, which is 14,322, which is what is going to go in that cell. You can also see that there are results next to each of the group of numbers. These are the numbers that will be added up and then divided, and that will give me my average. If I decide I don't want that range, I can delete it, and that will be my 3, and here's my result. The function is exactly the same if I had typed it or if I had used the drop-down. It's just easier if it walks you through if you're new to functions. So that is the average of the net income. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop up or type inside the chat at any time. So we've gone through the functions and all of the different ways that you can insert them, which is the formula bar. We can also insert that date and time. There is a date one here. I want to put in today so I can find it. And just so that you can see what that looks like, it returns the current date formatted as a date. It doesn't have any arguments. That's the reason why the parenthesis is open and closed. And there are a lot of functions like that where it will be just a word and then the open and close. So today means today. Caution when you're using this, when you open the file, guess what that date's going to be? It will be the date that you open the file, it'll be not the static date of that you created it. That you'd actually have to type in. So when I hit enter, it will show the date, but keep the function in the background. So tomorrow if I open it, it'll be 5/11. So just be aware that this will be a living date. Some of the different types of functions that you can use. So one of the things that you noticed when I had selected the entire total expense is the words total expense. I highlight this. It shows up in this area right here, and this is a name box. This name box does a lot of different things, but one of the things we're going to focus on is it names your ranges. So you can then use them to quickly navigate to them. You can print that range, or you can use that named range in a calculation, which is what we're going to be doing. So if I wanted the average of all expenses, the total expenses here, I already have named it total expense. So I'm going to click inside the cell, which is B15 for my total average expenses, hit equal sign because I'm putting in a formula or a function, type in my average, open parenthesis, but instead of grabbing a cell reference range, I'm going to type in my named range by first typing in my T, O, and you could see I have found everything that's listed with the TO, which is total expense, total hours, or today. I'm going to use total expense. It puts that named range in. I close it with the parenthesis, and it now gives me my average of 14,322, which we know is correct because we looked at it before. If you look down at the bottom of my status bar, right now it's pretty empty. I'm going to right-click on it. When you right-click on the status bar, it gives me a menu of all of these items that I can display in my status bar that will be very useful for me as I'm going along. Notice here, average, count, min, max, and sum. I usually do the average, the count, and the sum all the time. I even think these ones are set by default. But we're going to talk just about those. Watch what happens. I'm just going to click anywhere, just turn off that menu, when I select this range. Not only does the total expense come up here, but down in my status bar you can see there's my average range, there's my count, and there's my sum. So I don't need to create a calculation if I just need to know a total. I can just highlight it. As long as that information is turned on in my status bar, if somebody says, so what is the total of all of the expenses? I can just highlight them all, and it's going to tell me it's 85,330 with just the highlight. I don't have to go in and create the formula. Now that's not going to stick. You know, someone else might need it later, so it would be best to create the formula or the function. But for real quick reference, highlighting will tell you what you need to know, as long as it's turned on by right-clicking in your status bar. So this introduces us to that named range, the total expense. That's how I named it. There's a couple different ways that you can name them. One of them is using this named bar. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight my January expenses. I'm going to click and drag. Just my expenses, my range for expenses. I'm going to click inside my named box, and I'm going to type in January expenses, and I'm hitting enter. As soon as I hit enter, it assumes the name. So if I wanted to get rid of this formula, which is the equal sum of the range, I could replace it with equal sum, if I type it right, and then start typing in my January expenses. Double click, close it, and it's going to give me the exact same. Why would I do that? Sometimes it's easier to remember if you use titles. If it's plain English, a range might not be rememberable, but January expenses, even before I highlighted it, I could say to you all, where are the January expenses? And you already knew it was supplies, office, wages, and utilities. So sometimes when you're referring to formulas or functions, actually, It will be easier if you do it in plain English, and using named ranges will help you do that. We can do the same thing with our February. I'm going to highlight that, but up in the Formulas tab, we have a whole section called Defined Names. So now I can actually name it by using a pop-up box. If that's helpful, you can just click on the Define Name. I can type in February expenses. The scope is where would I like this range to be available to. I want it available throughout my entire workbook. Regardless of how many spreadsheets I add to this workbook, this range of February expenses on this sales sheet, those ranges of C5 through C8 on the sales sheet will be available forever. So if I go down 200 tabs and I decide, gee, I really need February expenses total on my 200th tab, I can do that. Excel will come back to this, pick up the totals, and drop it into that 200th tab. That's the other reason that you want to do named ranges, because it's just easier to be able to pull information from another worksheet within the same workbook. There are other options. You can see that those are the different ones. If I only want it available in sales, it will not be available in any other worksheet. So I can be specific or I can be general. So I usually keep mine available everywhere. This little guy right here, you can see that there's the name of the tab, sales. The exclamation point is the syntax in which that separates the name of the tab to the actual range. The dollar signs that are in between each one of these, that is the difference between absolute and relative. When you're using an absolute cell reference, that means it will not change if I copy or paste it somewhere else. That's the dollar sign. If I want it to change, I would remove those dollar signs. But for this point, just leave it as is. You can put a comment if you choose to and click OK. Notice up in the named range, there's February. So if I want to do for the last one, and that will be my March. I can also use my defined names to create them. I can use my name manager to manage. These are all of the different ranges that I have available throughout this workbook. So you can see that it's a very useful feature. I would like to change my January expenses, not the range. I can if I chose to, but I want to just change the name. I want to shorten it. I'm going to hit Edit, and I'm just going to type expense. So you can see that it's very easy. Oh, it's an existing name, so I can't do that. We'll just take it out of January. So now it's just called January. I can do the same thing for February, and these normally are in alphabetical order. So, and then there should be a March. There it is. Now, why am I doing that? Because that's a lot of typing, March expenses. It's a lot easier to go January, February, March. So now it's time to do a formula or a function by using an average. This is the first quarter, which is those three. So I'm going to do an equal average again. Open it up. Now remember, each number is separated by a comma. So in this case, January is a number, comma, February, comma, March. Close my parenthesis, and now I get an average of the first quarter. I could have just named that first quarter, but if you like to keep things separate because you might use them in a different function or formula down the road, then you're not having all of these unnecessary named ranges. You can reuse these. Down in the bottom in my status bar, the average is 3208. You can see that that was the result of my formula. So my function. So you can see that I can sort of check myself to make sure that I am on the right path. So we have taken a look here at how to name what is a named range, which is naming a cell reference, range of cell references so that it's easy to remember. We can name them by using the name box. We can name them by going into define name. We can edit and manage them by going into the named manager. I can then use them in multiple different ways, including functions and formulas. So it's easy and it's nice to use the named ranges. This is going to be helpful, especially down the road if you're creating a database or something like that. It will be very useful to have ranges. So the next thing that we're going to move on to, if no one has any questions, just type them inside the chat, is understanding a little bit of some formula errors. I just want to bring up two. And you can see that I have two of them sitting right here. And a lot of people don't quite understand what they mean. So these most common errors I'm going to explain. The one that has the division by 0 is exactly that. It was an attempt that was made to divide a number by 0. This often occurs when you create a formula that refers to a blank cell. In this case, we actually have the equal average, which is going to give us a result of the average of B11 through G11, which is our net income. And then we would like to divide it by 0. Well, you can't divide by 0 because it gives you an error. I can correct it by removing that division, or perhaps I needed to divide it by 10. And I just happened to make a mistake and not hit that 1. Once I do that, you can see that it actually performs the correction, and now I get my answer. So one way is by reading it. There is another way that you can go through some of these errors. Here we have a value, and you can see it's the same concept. It's plusing an A8. If we go to A8, you can see that that's not a value, it's text. So the value is the mathematical formula that references a text entry. So that means you got the wrong reference there. But if you don't know how to read the function or the formula that you're looking at, there is an entire formula auditing section. And so what I usually use is the error checking. It pops up this little box. It gives me help on the error. It shows me step by step how the calculation. I can completely ignore the error if I know that it's right, or I can edit it in the formula bar, which then highlights different colors matching my different ranges, and you can see that the green one is referencing a text. So if I want to add it by perhaps, I wanted a number actually. Let me go back to that. And I want this one. Now I can hit enter, and I'm going to get my number. So it'll allow me to create it, and I can hit resume, and it's instantly going to go to the next number. So by using the error checking, I may have more than one error within a spreadsheet, and it will check each one. So it's a nice little feature. This is where I'm going to show you the help. By clicking help on it, it opens up a web page, and there I can read through what the types of error and how to fix it. Show the calculation steps, and it's saying here's your total, it's divided by 0. Anyone who knows anything about math, your answer is going to be 0. So the best thing to do is to just delete it, and then it will fix it. So those are just two of the common. That doesn't mean they're the only ones, but those are the two common ones. Now we're going to get into more of the specific or more commons. We're going to take a look at if, payment, dsum, and vertical lookup. I sort of have this cheated here for you, and some of the things are highlighted. This can be a bit daunting or a little bit overwhelming, especially when you're first learning about functions and formulas. I have two things highlighted here. I have this green, which is where my answers are going to go, and I have this orangish one, which is really part of what I need in order to make my function work. As I have been saying, if you can say it in English, then you can create it, the function for it, or a formula. So this is what I need in actually statement. If the gross pay is greater than 500, gross pay, this row. If that is greater than 500, I should say equal to. So I want to put in there equal to or greater than 500, then I'm going to multiply the gross pay by a 0.15. If it is not, then I'm going to multiply it by 0.10. So this is a logic function. It is having Excel determine a path, and then based on the answer of the logical test, it will either go path A or path B, meaning true or false. So your if statements are true or false statements. If something is true, put this answer here. If it is false, then put this answer there. That's why it's a very, very common and frequently used one. I'm going to go ahead and click inside my little hidden cell here, and this is exactly what the syntax for this particular formula or function will look like. So I have the equal sign and I'm using the word if. Then I open it up to B14. That is my first cell. Actually, if B14 right there is greater than sign or equal to 500, then that little comma means next argument. Take B14, which is my gross, and multiply it by a 0.15. If it is false, then take B14 and multiply it by 10. By saying it in English and then taking a look at it, the syntax in Excel's language, you can see that it makes perfectly good sense. So now I'm going to actually type it in. Equal if, and then I'm going to use the clicking function. So B14, no room for error there. It's going to be greater than or equal to 500, comma, and if it is true, I want B14 to be multiplied by 0.15. If it is false, then I'm going to take B14 and multiply it by 0.10. Close it with the parenthesis. And it is 75. Since it is true, it is multiplied by 0.15. If it were false, then it would be $50. Once I have my function created, do I have to type it in the rest of those cells? And the answer is no. This little guy right here, and I'm going to zoom in, right here is this little box right above my white plus. That's called the fill handle. The fill handle will copy a function or formula for you. So it will automatically make it relative, which means if I move over a column, it will adjust all of the cell references within my function or formula by one column. If I move down 5 rows, it will automatically adjust all of my rows by 5 rows. That's relative. Remember the $ reference I used? That's absolute, which means if I copy it, it will not change. It will stay frozen at that cell reference. We want this to be relative. Roll with the flow. If I copy it, it's going to adjust all my cell references. As soon as I come on that little square in the lower right corner of my active cell, it makes my mouse pointer turn into a black plus from a white plus. Click and hold my left mouse button as I'm dragging, and once I let go, it will then copy it. So now you can see that this particular gross pay is not 500. It does not mean it gets calculated by 0.15. It was calculated by 0.10, and there is the answer, which is indeed 10%. So that's how you can do an if statement. There's a lot of things you can do with this. You can do if-ands, if-ors. You can do multiple ifs within the same one. It's a great one to look into if you have been struggling trying to find something that will help you do a logical decision within your Excel. The next one we're going to go to is payment. And again, I'm going to move up on it a little bit. These are a little bit hard to see. Part of the functions that we're talking about is you do have to know a little bit about it prior to actually attempting to do it. Meaning, I have to know or understand how a payment is determined. And I might not know that, and that's the reason why you should use your function, insert function option, because it will explain some of it, but you still need to know your loan amount. You still need to know the length of the loan, and you still need to know the interest rate. Excel is not going to bring those items to the table. So sometimes in order for you to create a formula or a function or a spreadsheet, you have to bring some information with you. The other thing you need to know is what are we trying to accomplish here? We want a monthly payment, monthly, keyword. Loan length in years. So if it's 20 years, how many months is that? How do I get this formula to break those years into months? Because if I need a monthly payment, that means that the years needs to be broken into months, and that means my interest rate, which is annual, needs to be broken into months. So those are also part of the information that you sort of need to know. So here's my English statement. What is the monthly payment if I take a loan out for $200,000 for 20 years with an interest rate of 7%? Again, my little cheat sheet is the equal payment is going to be your function. We're going to take first look at C4, which is my interest rate. My interest rate is annually. So in order to get a monthly interest rate, I need to divide the annual rate by 12 months. The next argument is B4, which is my years. In order for me to get a total amount of months, I take the number of years and multiply it by 12 months, and that will give me my total months. And the last but not least, A4 is just my loan amount. This is exactly what we would need in order to create this monthly payment. So this time I'm going to create it, but I'm going to use the insert function. And I'm going to type in here payment. I'll just type in payment. It should take me to it. And here is my rate. So the first thing it wants to know is what is my rate. So if I, does it have to be in the order? Yes, it should always be in that order. And that's the reason why this insert function is a great tool to use, because it's putting it in the order that you need it to be. So it's asking me what is my rate. Again, I use the little collapse, click on the cell reference, but that's not all. It's in annual, so I have to divide it by 12. Bring back my pop-up, go into my NPR. NPR is number of payments, which is right now in years. So I click on my arrow, select the cell reference, and this time I need to multiply it by 12. And the last one is my present value, or PV, and that is just the cell reference for my loan amount. So you can see that it's already giving me a number here. This is future value and this is type. If you click inside of these, it will give you an explanation. And what this is if you leave it with a 1, put a 1 in there, that means your payments are at the beginning of the period. If you leave it blank or at 0, then that means your payment is due after. Sort of like paying the cable bill up front and then using the service throughout the month. So that's how they can determine when, because that is going to change the way the interest is calculated. So we're just going to leave these two blank and we put it in there. Now notice that it's $1,550 per month for $200,000 at 20 years, but it's in red and it has the little parentheses. That's because it's a negative number. It's a number going out. If you wanted this to be positive, in math, we learned that a negative plus a negative equals a positive. And since this is a negative, if I create my function by using a negative, this negative and that negative will make it a positive number. Just a little tip. At this point, because I know if I copy this, it will then recreate and update based upon how many rows that I've copied down. It will automatically update each one of my formulas, and these are the monthly payments based on this. And you can type in more questions if you have, but since we're about 7 minutes out, I want to make sure that we cover everything, but I'll be more than happy to stay afterwards. This one is a database sum, and this is going to be actually like a lookup, but it also does an addition. This is a little bit confusing if you don't know anything about databases. Access is actually created like Excel, so you can actually do a lot of database functions within Excel. Once you sort of outgrow Excel, you can move up to Access. So this is sort of the beginning of database. What we're going to be doing is in English. I have my column headings right here. We're going to be doing it twice. The column heading is the column that I would like Excel to look under. The type of trip would be the content within that row or that column. And then the number of trips is somewhere in here. I would like Excel to add up or sum a number and then display it. So that's why I have 3 pieces that I'm dealing with. My column heading, which is the column that I want it to look under, the type of trip or annual, it could be trip or it could be tickets, it could be your choice here, and then the number, which means it's going to do the calculation. So I'm going to show you the hidden formula function. So we use the DSUM, database sum. This A1 through I-23, if you notice, is my entire table. So the first thing I have to do is tell it where to look. What is my array? What is my table? Because it can look at any one of these columns, and it can look through each column to pick any piece of content that's in there. And then it's got to look through all of this table in order to select the results based upon that content. So it needs to have the range of the entire table. The next thing it wants is, what am I adding up? I'm going to be adding up annual trips. And when I add up the annual trips, where am I looking at the criteria to tell me which of these trips am I going to be adding up? That's how this reads. When I fill this in, it will make a little bit more sense. So the column heading, and then the number of trips, the type of trip and the number of trips. The number of trips is where that function will actually go. So to save time, I'm going to go ahead and just copy it. Now notice C5, C25, and C26, it's wrong, so I'm going to have to adjust that. Annual trips I am going to use, and A1 through I-23 is correct. I put this function inside the number of trips because that is what is going to be calculated and display my answer. I'm going to adjust the C25 to C26 to match my column heading and my type of trip. Sorry about that. And I'm going to highlight these two. So now my function is correct. It's going to look in C, well first it will look at my table highlighted in blue. It will find the title, annual trips. It will go to whatever I type inside C29 as a column heading. In this case, I'm going to type in purpose. It will scan down purpose for the type of trip, and in this case, I might put in business. It will add all of the annual trips that are marked as business and put my result in my number of trips. So now it says 81 because it's just adding up everything. So I'm going to put in purpose, and then I'm going to type in business. And notice it says 42. So through this table, it found purpose. It came down here and actually found all of the business, and it went across and actually added each one of these business ones up. Notice I used the control key to select these. Down at the bottom, you can see that it says 21. Am I missing a business here? And it should say 42. Annual trips. Oh, that's a little weird. It should be right. Let me try a different one. Let's do purpose. And this time we're going to do pleasure. And then it's going to equal dsum, my database. Oh, I had some hidden. Sorry about that. I was scrolled up. So it's going to be 42 when I re-enter them, comma, the title, which is going to be in text, so I have to have the quote, comma, and then my criterion range, which are these two, and I close it up. And so I have 19 trips under pleasure, 42 under business. Next, I really need to add up all of the business, not just some of them. And then business, 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 and business, business. Down at the bottom, you can see it's 42. So it's a nice complicated way for you to be able to say, I really need to know how many annual trips based on someone's purpose of taking it, and it will give you the answer. Once this is set up, you shouldn't really change it, and it's useful. But it is a database function. The only other way that you can do this is by putting it into either a pivot table or an actual database. You're asking a question of the worksheet, and based on that criteria that you put in to the heading and the type of information underneath that heading, it will then give you the results of a column that you're asking. It could have been number of tickets as well. I could have asked, change this one here to the annual cost of tickets. And then you can see that it gives me the number. The last one that we're doing is also this kind of lookup kind of thing, and that's a vertical lookup. And again, I'll start with explaining the syntax. The VLOOKUP needs to know what my criterion cell is. In this case, it's E30, so it's going to be the client number. That's the number that I'm going to enter that it's going to look for within my table. And then the 9 is what column do I want to display as the answer. And in this case, I want it to do a total cost of ticket. So it's going to look up whatever client number I put in. It's going to go over 9 columns and display the cost of the tickets that they had purchased. So again, save some time. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put it in the answer. Right now it says NA because I do not have anything in here. So I'm going to choose client 12, Peter, and it should result in that number. So I'll put 12, and you can see that the total cost of tickets was exactly what Peter had purchased. Now, it could be any one of these column numbers. I could put in column 1, 2, 3, let's say 4. Oh, it doesn't like that one because it's not. Oh, I got that there. It's got, not screw up my function. And you can see now that it's displaying his address. So it's not necessarily just for values. It is actually looking something up. This is very useful if you have thousands of rows that you need to find someone on. You can do a very quick vertical lookup. So that's it. It's very quick, but I think you get just enough information that perhaps maybe you'll try some of these out. I am going to go ahead and ask for some questions, and I'll be more than happy to stay and answer any of your questions for you.